these will really take on a whole different color and weight and heft to it once they're dried. These ones, you can hear, they're pretty hard, and they've got a pretty good hollow, clean hollow sound. That's how you know that they're completely cured and dry. And you can see the texture that we got. It's just subtle but interesting kind of weavy texture. And I just want to show you, here's one that I really, while it was wet, I burnished it more so the texture's a little softer, versus this one where I didn't burnish it much. You get more, these are the wrinkles that I left in it on purpose. You get more of a, oh wait, this is one I stamped it. So when you don't burnish it as much, you get more of that weave showing. So it's subtle, but there is a difference. And then this is that one, I was trying to remember what those lines were. That's the one that I carefully stamped the rubber stamp into. So we'll see how those turn out with the color wash. Now here's the difference. I want to show you, if you turn your plaster gauze upside down onto plastic, which I haven't had the same luck if I have it face up and I put plastic on it, it's a little bit different. So this is what happens when you turn it face down. So the plastic's on there, I've just let it sit there until it dried, and here's the effect that it gives. You get this really smooth, this is where the kind of sloppiness of that plaster water settled to the bottom and created a whole different final finish. You can see that. And I love that those little pocks and kind of the smooth area and these edges. So it's a subtle difference, but if your focus is on texture, visual texture, that's a big difference in terms of the effect. So we're just gonna do a quick color wash on those. And that's just kind of my default, is to start with a color wash, because it helps me see better. Like right now, all I have to go on really is like light and shadow. But when I put a little bit of color in there, those really subtle low spots show up a lot more. And not only that, but any other color, like if I end up going back to, say, mostly white on these, having a little bit of a wash underneath, I think gives it a little bit more depth. Although there has been a time or two where I don't do anything and I just keep it really bone white. Like the only depth is going to be from whatever actual texture is on it and the way the light and shadow plays with it. That's a pretty pigmented wash. I'm using a wet wipe. It's going to be my first choice to pull back as much color as I can. I mean, holy cow, there's so much texture to that, visually speaking. I could, if it was too much, I could come in with a little bit of like that plaster gesso mix and kind of smear it in and smooth some of that out. I could totally do that. And sometimes I do, if there's, like, let's say I wanted to do an image transfer right here and there's too much texture, I can kind of come and smooth that out, blend it in with more color wash if I want, but create a smoother surface. So let's try that one that I stamped on. See, this is basically watercolor paper. If you don't want it to be so thirsty, you could coat it with some gesso first. That would give you a little bit more control over how much paint gets sucked in. In fact, I'll do that on this one. I'll coat it with some gesso, let it dry, and then we'll test the color wash on that. Okay, so I stopped and gessoed this and let it dry. So it doesn't, at this point, doesn't really look any different other than the fact that it's, can't see any of what's underneath it. You can't see any of the black foam core peeking through. So I'm going to use the same color wash and we'll see what kind of difference we get with some gesso on it. I mean, already you can see that it's a little bit more repellent, which is odd because gesso, you know, the point of gesso is for it to hold your paint. It's just that plaster is even more grabby. So look at that difference. If you remember this one, I was hardly able to wipe it off. So a layer of gesso over the plaster gauze will give you much more subtle paint, much more control over how much it takes on. So I'm just gonna do a light white back and let this one be mostly white. So that's the difference between gessoed and ungessoed with a color wash. Kind of makes me want to gesso these two. I might go ahead and gesso these two so that I can have a little bit more control over the color wash too. So, but you get the point, right? The color wash really makes the texture show up a ton more. So I've got a lot of color washing to do in this class before this project's over. So I'm going to stop with the gauze for now and we'll move on to the next stuff that we'll start being able to assemble.